All right, welcome in to another edition of Carps Corner, and thankfully, somehow I had the energy and had the time after staying up till about midnight doing the radio show from 3 to 6 or 6 to 9 this morning, getting a workout in. Gonna try to get this done here so that everybody's got a little preview and a recap of what happened, obviously Thursday night, and then leading in to Friday night and what it potentially looks like for Ohio State. Um, Huge night last night as we start off with for the Buckeyes. Um, Big deal. CJ Stroud going number 2 overall. And it's amazing. It's lying season. We talk about it being lying season. There was a smoke screen of epic proportion and probably put on, honestly, by the team that drafted him, like the Houston Texans. Because I think basically what it comes down to in the draft is it's basically turns into I don't know, elementary school boy and girl that like each other, and you're throwing rocks at each other and making fun of them and saying this and that. But you only do that to earn their attention and ultimately earn their affection. In the NFL draft, you do that so that you maybe try to scare off other people, make them less understanding of what your potential intentions could be. So all those things came to a head. The Houston Texans took CJ Stroud, and it wasn't like they took CJ Stroud because, you know what, they just didn't necessarily like anybody else there. And they didn't really feel like, taking Will Anderson that high would have been worth it. They take CJ and then trade back up right behind him and take Will Anderson. And so that has D'Amico Ryan's hands all over it. He wants his franchise quarterback, and he wants a stalwart on his defense. Young coach, came out my year in the draft. They were same age, and he's had a lot of success out in San Fran. So this is interesting to see, and love it. I love it for Ohio State, and I think it's a really good deal for Houston. People had kind of linked Paris Johnson to Arizona at 3, thought that might be a little high. So what does Arizona do? They trade back, and then all of a sudden, boom, jump back up to 6, get Paris Johnson at 6th. For those of you that didn't know, and I knew his dad played, I didn't realize he was drafted, I think, in the 5th round by the Arizona Cardinals. So Paris was excited to go there. It's probably not a franchise that people really aspire to go to. Phoenix is a great city, but it's not really run all that well in particular. So you're like, is this some place that's worthy? Are they going to develop me? Are they going to develop the guys around me? Are we going to be able to win and have success? There's a lot of questions, that are always swirling around it. But the Bidwells, apparently they hired a new GM, their coach. They feel like they're in a much better spot. And this is great for Kyler Murray because all Paris Johnson's going to have to do now is protect him. And so they haven't done a good job of protecting that guy. They paid him like their franchise quarterback. Now they gave him franchise level protection. I got to be honest, I was hoping he would slide to 9 where the Bears would be so he could get teamed up with his former quarterback in Justin Fields, but better for Paris Johnson. So 2 Buckeyes going in the top 6 of the draft. I'll have a stat for you on that in a minute. But Jaxon, Smith, and Njigba then going at number 20, a little bit lower than maybe people expected. I thought he might be cruising in somewhere around there in the mid-teens, especially as you started looking some of the teams that were available. The Lions, the Bucks, you had the Jets and Packers flipped. Pats. I mean, there was teams that you thought he could have went to, but he opened up the receiving position. So he goes 20 to Seattle, and he's the first of 4 consecutive receivers taken, which had never happened before. Never in the draft have there been 4 receivers taken in the first round in a row. He led that off. And I think people realize, hey, it's getting late in the first round. We like Jaxon. As soon as Jaxon came off, boom, Zay Jones, we got to go get these guys. And because they might not be there. And so 4 go, that was kind of the sweet spot. At one point, there was an over-under of 4.5 with a lot of the juice going to the under. Then it moved to 3.5 with a lot of juice going to the over. So 4 was kind of that window whopper right there. If you like to ultimately bet on it, figure it out. So those were the 3 Buckeyes that were taken. With that, Ohio State now has 90 guys who were drafted in the first round. And so that's a pretty big deal for 90 guys to ultimately be taken in the first round. And we'll throw that up there because that's the most in NFL history. So they've got 90 guys in the first round. CJ, Paris, and Jaxon, proud to be part of that 90. We've had a number of guys, obviously, over the years, and that's the most. You've got USC with 85, Alabama, who's made a huge surge lately, with 79. Notre Dame was 70, and Miami was 69, respectively. So they all are sitting there. That is what the top 5 looks like. But Ohio State leading the charge with that. So that's big. And then with those guys getting drafted, 483 draft picks for Ohio State. So that's pretty darn big as well. And there's going to be a slew of guys added to that as I threw that up and taking a look at that statistic as well. So you had CJ go 2, Paris go 6. So you're asking yourself, not both top 5, but 3 other times in the history of Ohio State, there have been a pair of teammates drafted in the top 6. First to do it, and I was thinking, gosh, who could it be? I actually nailed these on the radio this morning. The first one I got was Zeke and Bosa in 2016 draft. That just popped in my head because they went, I believe, 3 and 4 back to back. And Dallas was at 4, and they were debating who they would potentially take. And the Chargers made it easy for him by taking Joey Bosa and eliminating him. And then you had in 97, Orlando Pace going 1 overall, and then Sean Springs, I believe, going 6. You had Chase Young and Jeff Okudah going to Washington and then Detroit back to back, and I believe it was a couple years ago. And then this year, ultimately, was CJ and Paris. So 4th time that has ever happened for Ohio State. So that's pretty big there. And then also the first time in Big Ten history, as we throw this guy up, you have the historic duo of CJ Stroud and Jaxon Smith and Njigba, who really didn't play together much this year, but it's the first time in Big Ten history a quarterback and wide receiver combo have been selected in the first round in the same draft. So that's big with it as well. And then Jaxon was the 3rd receiver in the last 2 years to be taken in the first round. And you have to, for Ohio State, you have to imagine they're going to have a 4th next year with Marvin Harrison, and heck, maybe Emeka Egbuka slides in there as well. And you got 5 in 3 years, which would be crazy. But you're going to certainly have 4. Another number, consecutive first rounders taken in a streak in a year over the years. Bama's had 1 for the last 15 years. Ohio State's had 1 for the last 8. That's 2nd. Georgia, 6 straight years. That is 3rd. So it's also a little interesting nugget and a little interesting stat. We talk about Ohio State being wide receiver U. How do they stack up with wide receiver U? Well, Tennessee coming into the night had the most receivers drafted in the modern draft in the first round with 11. And Jaxon Smith and Njigba, what number did he become? Well, he became the 11th guy ultimately to be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, now tying Tennessee. So that's some big time ball there as well. But excited for those guys. I think they all went to pretty good spots with their expectation. And CJ is going to be the face of the franchise now for the Texans. It's a big weight that he's going to have to bear, a lot of on his shoulders. But the good news is for him, you got a young coach, a fairly new general manager. They've got a pretty solid plan. He has a good offensive line. He already has Laramie Tunsil protect him. So he has some protection. They got to continue to build out some weapons for him. I think that'll be key. And then also the fact that he had another first rounder go right after him that'll be able to kind of share the load of the face of the franchise, 1 on offense, 1 on defense. So you feel a little bit better about that. And I mean, it's kind of crazy when everyone looks at this and, you're talking about guys dropping this and that. And we've overanalyzed, everything to death. But you look at the Texans, I think getting the best defensive player in the draft and then getting one of the 2 best quarterbacks. Tip for tat, who do you like? It's a preference thing, as I talked about in the earlier episodes. But this was a big day for them being able to get those 2 guys. And the film doesn't lie. And I know Will Anderson was drafted, obviously, with a 3rd pick. His film didn't lie. It's the same as CJ. You looked at this and said, hey, Will Anderson, best defensive player coming out. Makes a lot of sense. CJ Stroud, you can say him and Bryce Young have comparable film. Way better than Anthony Richardson, way better than Will Levis. Hendon Hooker had some good film. Anthony Richardson has some remarkable plays, but he just doesn't have the consistency of them, and the numbers don't bear it up, and it just doesn't all fit together. And so it leaves you're scratching your head a little bit as you're trying to reconcile the high end of the spectrum with him versus the low end of the spectrum. But CJ ultimately made out in this, and I thought got drafted in a really good spot. So I was very, very happy for him. And before we get moving on to tonight, recruiting does matter. I'll throw this up here. NFL draft by stars in the first round, 11 5-stars, 10 4-stars. So that's 21 of the 31 picks, because this year there weren't 32 teams with the Dolphins losing theirs. 8 3-stars and 2 unranked players. Now, here's a little bit of this. You're going to look and say stars matter. They do, because a third of the draft was 5 stars, a third was 4 stars. But I will say the fact that a third is 3 stars or lower is pretty indicative that you are still able to identify and develop. And so getting a 3-star isn't the worst thing in the world. You just got to pick the right guys who have the right traits, who are elite workers and want to be developed and have good coaches and a strength program to ultimately get them there. That's big time ball. And that's ultimately what you want to do and be able to get done. And so Ohio State's done that. I believe they've had more or as many 3-stars as anybody drafted in the first round. When you start talking about guys like Darren Lee and AJ Hawk and dudes like that who are 3-stars or unranked, who were able to have success and get developed in a really, really big way. And then it was a big night for the Big Ten. The SEC has dominated the first round. And they still were in first, but they were tied. They were tied this year with the Big Ten, with both conferences having 9 apiece. So Ohio State led the way with 3. Michigan chipped in. You saw Iowa chip in with a couple. What's crazy is Joey Porter Jr. was still sitting there in the green room. He could have easily went. Maybe if there was a 32nd pick, he could have gone and would have put Ohio or the Big Ten up to 10. But everybody's chipping in. Northwestern, had their tackle guard picked. I mean, everybody was kind of participating. Maryland had a corner. Illinois had a corner. Like, there was a lot of talent in the Big Ten this last year that came out. And that is good for Ohio State. It's good for the conference. It's great to see. They're getting a massive TV deal, and it's you in the SEC. You need to make sure that you stake your claim to be able to go out there and make sure people are watching and that you have talent in there for everybody to draft, and you can develop it and turn it, those 4 and 5 stars and even 3 stars, into first-round draft picks, because that's what guys ultimately want. So we're looking at tonight. We got Dwan Jones. I think he's first off the board, Big Thanos. Interesting to see where he goes. I think, there's some worries about his weight, potential ability to keep it down, some work ethic. I like Dwan a lot. He's big. I think he's a prototypical right tackle. He's a mauler. He can get a little head heavy at times, but when he's locked in, if he has a good O-line coach, a good strength program, he'll continue to bend. And I think he can be a really good pass blocker over there if you stick to it with him, but he will be a mauler in the run game. He's a guy that you could see like a Tennessee or someone like that really wanting to get, even though Tennessee, I believe, took a tackle last night, but he's one of those maulers that if you want to have a physical run game, like maybe Houston takes him or whoever it could be. I mean, Detroit, you get some guys and get up there and get after it, even though Detroit has a nice pair of tackles ultimately as well. I think Luke Whippler is the next guy off the board. It'll depend how this run of centers go. If you see a center go off, I think he's the second best one. If you see a center go off pretty early, mid-second round, I think Luke Whippler goes in the second. If not, I think he probably goes early third to mid-third. I don't know if he makes it out of today. I think Zach Harrison can go in anywhere from end of the second to end of the third. He could potentially slide to the fourth, but it's going to be depending on defensive ends and the run there and rush guys and who really likes him in his scheme. But those are the 3 dudes that I think can go on Friday night. And then you got Ronnie Hickman, Cam Brown, Tanner McAllister. I mean, there's some other guys there. I think Cam Brown, probably a 6th or 7th rounder. Tanner McAllister, people love, could be a free agent or potentially 7th rounder. Ronnie Hickman's a big enigma. He doesn't really have any testing numbers on him. He has good film. He's not the most fleet of foot guy you're going to find, but he's got great film and was a producer. He just wasn't able to push back on maybe some potential speed issues due to the fact he had a pulled hamstring and wasn't able to participate during the combine and get that thing going. So that's how the rest of the weekend should be shaping up for the Bucs. And then, and then Mitch Rossi too. I think Mitch Rossi will probably end up being a free agent and get signed somewhere as well. And then one other thing, and this is just, it's the most befuddling thing of the Big Ten. It drives me up a wall. When you get a chance to seize unclaimed ground and bring attention to your conference, do it. Don't go head to head with the behemoth, the NFL. Don't go head to head with live sporting events, especially if they're heavily covered. The Big Ten chose to introduce their new Big Ten commissioner on Friday night after the first round and before the second and third rounds of the NFL draft. Who's going to cover this? If this was next Wednesday, next Thursday, people would be all over it. There wouldn't be near as much stuff. Some NBA playoffs, some hockey playoffs, early Major League Baseball, some golf. There's not going to be anything there. Do it then. And so either A, there's an incompetence level, or B, you don't feel good putting Tony Petitti, your new commissioner, out where he's going to be drawing a lot of eyeballs. What are we doing, folks? Get it out there, put it out, wait a little bit, and make sure that it's going to be a premier event. Have that press conference at noon or 1 on a Thursday so that he can be the premier talking point after the draft by a week. Not this nonsense. And well, hey, I know you want to introduce him quickly, but listen, the early bird may get the worm, but the second mouse, you know what? A lot of times he gets the cheese. So let's make it easy on ourselves, folks. Let's make it easy. What are we doing? Big Ten. It's befuddling to me. But that wraps up this edition, this episode of Carps Corner. Want to get some back-to-back stuff out here. Hopefully get a chance to check this out before Friday night. And congratulations to the 3 Buckeyes that have gone, and congratulations to the Buckeyes that will go over the next 2 days, and all of them. Everybody gets drafted and gets signed. You go live your dream to have a chance to play football at the highest level. So please continue to like, subscribe, comment. We'll have a mailbag next week. We'll dive into all that. Make sure to share. Do everything you can. Thank you for the support, and we'll talk soon.